The Enchanted Wood, Chapter 12, What Happened to the Snowman. Everyone stared at the big white bears in horror. No one had thought of the chimney. What a pity they hadn't stopped it up. "I'm going to let the magic snowman in," said the first white bear. Then the father bear spoke up in a very sorrowful voice. "Cousin, why are we enemies? We have always been good friends up till now." The four white bears looked at him and at the mother bear in sudden amazement. They rushed at them with loud oomphy noises. Joe thought they were going to fight the three bears, but no, the white bears were not going to fight. They were hugging the three bears as tightly as they could, and to the children's amazement, tears were pouring down their furry faces. "We didn't know it was you," said the white bears. "Why, cousins, we would never have fought you if only we'd known you were the three bears we love so much." There, said the mother bear, wiping the tears of a white bear off her fur. "It's all right, but for goodness sake, tell the other bears we're friends. We don't want the front door battered down." Moonface opened the door and yelled out of it, "Bears, it's all right. This is the cottage of your cousins, the three bears. We're friends." But the white bears didn't answer or come in. Instead, a big white shape came up and squeezed through the door. The magic snowman. A chill fell over the little room. The white bears were frightened of him, for he was their master. He shut the door and glared at everyone out of his stone eyes. "So, even my own bears have gone over to the enemy," he said. "Uh-oh. What will you say if I turn you into ice and snow, everyone?" Nobody said anything. But, to Beth's surprise, Moonface shut the door and then went to the fire. He piled on 3 great logs and winked at Beth. The snowman took up a white bear by the scruff of his neck and shook him. "So you found your voices, did you?" he said. "Didn't I tell you that you were only to say oomph? Not speak a word to anyone? I won't have bears that talk." He picked up another white bear and shook him. "So you are friends with my enemies, are you?" he said. The room became very hot. Joe took off his coat. So did the others. Moonface slyly put on another log. The fire crackled and shot great flames up the chimney. Franny wished she could take off everything, she was so hot. "Whatever does Moonface think he's doing making the room so hot?" she thought crossly. But just as she was about to tell him what she was thinking, he winked at her, and she said nothing. Moonface had some strange plan that he was carrying out. The snowman went on and on, grumbling and threatening. Everyone listened and said nothing. Moonface raked the fire and it blazed up higher. "Now, this is what I'm going to do," said the magic snowman. "I'm going to take this nice little cottage for my own, and I shall live here. All of you others can live in a snow house and freeze for all I care, for you will all wait on me and do whatever I say." "Yes," said everybody. They all knew now what Moonface's plan was. He meant to make the room so hot that the magic snowman would melt. Clever old Moonface. A little trickle of water began to run from the snowman's broad white back, which was near the fire. Moonface pointed to it secretly and grinned. Franny thought Moonface's beaming face looked so funny that she began to giggle. She really couldn't help it. Goldilocks giggled too and stuffed a handkerchief into her small mouth. The baby bear gave a high squeak of a giggle. "How dare you laugh?" shouted the snowman angrily. "Outside, all of you, outside. This is my cottage now, and not one of you shall stay here." They all crowded outside except Moonface, who crouched behind a big chair, determined not to leave the fire in case it burnt low. Outside it was bitterly cold. The white bears quickly dug up the snow and made a high wall to shelter the others from the wind. They crouched there, cuddling close to one another for warmth. The big white bears wrapped their furry arms around the children and warmed them beautifully. Joe thought they were very kind indeed. They waited and they waited. They could see smoke pouring from the chimney of the cottage, and they knew that Moonface must be keeping up the fire. The bears oomphed every now and again, and the children whispered to one another. Then suddenly the door of the cottage was flung open, and Moonface stood there, his big face beaming like a full moon. "You can come back now," he shouted. "It's quite safe." They all crowded back to the cottage. Joe looked for the snowman, but he was gone. There was nothing to show that he had been there except for a very large puddle of water. "He melted very quickly," said Moonface. "He may have been very magic and very powerful, but he was just made of snow after all, so he melted like a real snowman on a sunny morning." The polar bears oomphed with delight. They had hated being servants to the snowman. "We'll all say goodbye to you now," they said to the three bears. "This cottage is cosy, but it's too hot for us. Come and see us again whenever you like. Goodbye." Everyone hugged them goodbye, and Joe felt quite sad to see them go. Moonface shut the door after them. "Now we'll go back home," he said. "I'm a bit tired of this land. Come on, bears, help me to get the cottage back safely." He didn't do the same magic as before. He drew a circle on the floor in blue chalk, and the three bears stood inside holding paws. Moonface danced around them, singing strings of odd magic words. A wind rose up and the cottage rocked. Darkness came down, and for a moment no one could see anything at all. Then gradually the darkness went and the wind blew no more. The sun shone warmly in at the window. Beth gave a shout. "I say, we're back in the little woody corner where we first saw the cottage, and it's daytime now, not night time." "Well, we've been having this adventure all night long," said Moonface with a laugh. "It's sunrise now, the night is gone. You'd better hurry off home, children, or you'll be scolded for leaving your beds at night." They hugged Goldilocks and shook hands with the three bears. "We'll come back and see you sometime," said Franny. "Thank you so much for all your help." Goldilocks and the bears stood at the door and waved goodbye as Moonface hurried the three children away down the lane to catch the train back to the Enchanted Wood. It wasn't long before they'd got to the station, waited for a train, slid off the roof and settled down in a carriage. When they got to the Enchanted Wood, they said goodbye to Moonface, and Franny gave him a kiss for being such a help. He was so pleased that he went red all over his enormous face, and Beth laughed. "You look like the setting sun now," she said. "You really ought to be called Sunface." "Goodbye, and see you soon, I hope," called Moonface. Off went the children home and got into bed just about an hour before their mother called them to get up. My goodness, they were sleepy all that day. Chapter 13. Moonface Gets into Trouble. The children didn't really feel that they wanted to go to any of the lands at the top of the faraway tree for a little while. It was a bit too exciting to climb through the clouds and see what was above them. But they did want to see their friends in the tree, especially dear old Moonface. So the very next time they had a day to themselves, they set off through the Enchanted Wood to the faraway tree. There was no rope to guide them this time. It was only at night that the rope was swung through the boughs to help the woodland folk up and down. The children began to climb up. Every door and window in the tree seemed shut today, and not a soul was about. It was quite dull climbing up the tree. Even when they reached Silky's house, that was shut too, and they couldn't hear Silky singing or anything. They knocked, but there was no answer. So on they went up to Moonface's, keeping a good lookout for Dame Washalot's dirty water to come swishing down on them. But not even her water appeared that day. It all seemed very quiet and peaceful. They reached Moonface's house at the top of the tree and knocked at his door. Nobody opened it. But inside, they could quite well hear somebody crying. It was very mysterious. "It doesn't sound like Moonface," said Franny, puzzled. "Let's go in and see who it is." So they opened the door and went in, and it was Silky, sitting in a corner, crying bitterly. "Whatever's the matter?" cried Joe. "And where's old Moonface?" asked Franny. "Oh dear," sobbed Silky. "Moonface has been thrown into some dreadfully strange land at the top of the faraway tree because he was rude to Mr. What's-his-name down below." "What, that old man who's always sitting in a chair and snoring?" said Beth, remembering that they hadn't seen him that day. Whatever did Moonface do? Oh, he was very naughty, wept Silky. So was I. You see, we heard Mr. What's-his-name snoring as usual, and we crept up to him and saw that his mouth was wide open. And, oh dear, we popped a handful of acorns into it. And when he woke up, he spluttered and popped, and then he caught sight of us hiding behind a big branch. Goodness, did you really dare to do such a naughty thing? Cried Beth. No wonder he was angry. Moonface is dreadfully bad sometimes, said Silky, wiping her eyes. He makes me naughty too. Well, we ran away up the tree to Moonface's house. I got in safely, but Moonface didn't. And Mr. What's-his-name caught hold of him and threw him right through the hole in the clouds into the land that is there today. Good gracious. Well, can't he get back? Said Franny in alarm. He can climb down the ladder, surely, back into the tree. Yes, he could, said Silky, but you see Mr. What's-his-name is sitting on the ladder ready to catch him and throw him back, so what's the use of that? What land is up there today? Asked Joe. The land of the old saucepan man, said Silky. He lives there in his cottage with his pots and pans and is quite harmless. But you see Mr. What's-his-name will sit on the ladder till the land swings around and another one comes. Then Moonface won't be able to get back and he may be lost forever. Oh dear, said Joe in dismay, and the girls stared at Silky in despair, for they were very fond of old Moonface now. Isn't there anything we can do? Asked Joe at last. Well, there's just one hope, said Silky, fluffing out her lovely golden hair. The old saucepan man is a great friend of Mr. What's-his-name's. If he knew his land was at the top of the faraway tree today, he might come along and have a cup of tea with Mr. What's-his-name, and then Moonface could slip down the ladder back home. Oh, said the children, and looked at one another. They could quite see that this meant one or all of them going up the ladder again and getting into another peculiar land. I'll go, said Beth. After all, Moonface helped us last time. We must help him now. We'll all three go, said Joe, so they set off to the topmost branch up the little ladder, where they found Mr. What's-his-name sitting reading his newspaper and brewing a pot of tea that sent swirls of steam up through the hole in the clouds. Please, can we pass? Asked Beth timidly. No, you can't, said Mr. What's-his-name rudely. Well, we've got to, said Joe, so if we tread on your feet you must excuse us. Mr. What's-his-name simply wouldn't move. He really was a very cross old man. He grumbled and growled at each of the children as they squeezed past him, and they were very glad when they had climbed through the hole and were in the land above. So this is the land of the saucepan man, said Franny, when they were standing on the grass safely. What a funny little land. It was. It was an island floating in what seemed a sea of white. It wasn't really much bigger than a large field. Beth went to the edge and looked over. Goodness, she said in alarm, it's like a cliff, and the sea is a big white cloud. Don't go too near the edge, anybody. It wouldn't be nice to fall off. Hey, hey, suddenly yelled an excited voice. They turned around and saw Moonface waving to them and running hard towards them. Hey, how did you get here? Hello, we came to see what we could do for you, said Joe. We heard what happened. Old Mr. What's-his-name is sitting on the ladder waiting for you. But Silky says this is the land of the saucepan man, who's a great friend of Mr. What's-his-name's. So we've come to see him and ask him if he'll go and have tea with his friend. Then you can slip down safely and go home. Oh, good, said Moonface joyfully. I didn't know what land this was, and goodness me, I was quite afraid of falling off it, it's so small. Where do you suppose old saucepan man lives? I can't imagine, said Joe, looking around. All he could see was a very large stretch of grass with no house and nobody at all in sight. Where in the world could the saucepan man live? We'll have to go carefully all around this funny little land, said Beth. His house must be somewhere. But we'd better hurry, for you never know when the land will swing away from the faraway tree, and we don't want to live in this odd little place forever. They began to walk round the land. Presently they came to a cliff that was not quite so steep as the others. They peered over it. Joe pointed to some things stuck in the cliff. Whatever are those? He said. They look like some sort of steps down the cliffside, said Beth. They're saucepans, said Franny suddenly. Yes, saucepans, with their handles stuck firmly into the cliff, and the pan part to tread on. How strange. Well, this must be the way down to the saucepan man's house, said Joe, excited. Come on, be careful, girls, or you may fall and roll right over the edge of this land. So very carefully they began to climb down the cliff, treading on the saucepan stuck into the earth. It was really rather funny. They got down at last, and then they heard a very curious noise indeed. It was a sound of crashings and bangings and clatterings and clangings. Children were quite alarmed. The noise is coming from just around the corner, said Joe. They crept very cautiously to the corner and peeped around. There they saw a crooked little house with a saucepan for a chimney. The noise came from inside the house. The children crept to the window and looked in. And inside they saw the strangest little man they'd ever seen, dancing the strangest little dance. He had saucepans and kettles hung all over him. He wore a saucepan for a hat, and he crashed 2 saucepans together as he danced. Do you think he's dangerous? Said Joe in a whisper. Chapter 14. The Funny Old Saucepan Man. I don't think he's at all dangerous, said Franny. He has quite a kind face. Let's tap at the window, said Beth. So she tapped. But the saucepan man took no notice. He just went on dancing away, crashing his saucepans together. Joe tapped loudly. The saucepan man caught sight of him at the window and looked most astonished. He stopped dancing and went to the door. Come in and dance, he said. Oh, no, thank you, said Joe. We've just come to ask you to tea. Ask me for a bee, said the saucepan man, looking surprised. I'm so sorry, but I don't keep bees, only saucepans. Not bees, said Joe, to ask you out to tea. But I don't want to go to the sea, said the saucepan man. I don't like the water at all. Never did. Very kind of you, I'm sure, but I hate the sea. Not the sea, but tea, 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 cried Joe. Oh, tea, said the saucepan man. Well, why didn't you say that before? Then I would have understood. I did say that before, said poor Joe. What? Shut the door, said the saucepan man. Certainly, if you want to, give it a push. He can't hear very well, said Franny. He must be deaf. No, I'm not, said the saucepan man, hearing perfectly all of a sudden. Not a bit deaf. Only sometimes when my saucepans have been crashing around me rather a lot, I get noises in my ears afterwards, but I'm not deaf. I'm glad of that, said Joe politely. Cat? No, I haven't got a cat, said the saucepan man, looking all around. Did you see one? I didn't say anything about a cat, said Joe patiently. You did, I heard you, said the saucepan man, vexed. I don't encourage cats. I keep mice instead. I shall look for that cat. And then, with his saucepans clanging around him, he began to look for a cat that certainly wasn't there. Puss, 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 he called. Puss, puss, puss. There's no cat in your house, shouted Moonface. Mouse, where did you see a mouse? Said the old man, alarmed. I wouldn't like one of my mice to be caught by your cat. I tell you, we haven't got a cat, cried Joe, feeling quite cross. We've come to tell you about your friend, Mr. What's-his-name. For once the saucepan man seemed to hear Joe, and at once he stopped looking for the cat. Mr. What's-his-name, he cried. Where is he? He's a great friend of mine. Well, wouldn't you like to go and have tea with him then? Said Joe. Yes, certainly I would, said the saucepan man. Please tell me where he is. He's sitting on the ladder leading from the faraway tree to your land, shouted Joe. He's waiting there. Yes, for me, said Moonface in a whisper. Shh, said Franny. The saucepan man gave a yell of joy when he heard where his old friend was, and he set off for the cliff, shouting in delight. Hurrah, I've come to the faraway tree and I can see my friends again, and Mr. What's-his-name is waiting for me to have tea with him. Come on, come on. Up the cliff he went, treading on the saucepan steps, his own saucepans and kettles rattling and banging all round him. The children and Moonface followed. The saucepan man ran helter-skelter to the hole that led down to the topmost branch of the faraway tree, dropping a few saucepans on the way. When he got there, he peered down and saw Mr. What's-his-name sitting on the ladder, watching for Moonface. But the saucepan man didn't know that, of course. He thought that his friend was waiting for him. "Hey, hey, hey," he yelled, dropping a saucepan on top of Mr. What's-his-name in his excitement. "Hey, old friend." Mr. What's-his-name watched the saucepan bouncing off his foot down the branch of the faraway tree and wondered who it would hit. He looked up in amazement when he heard his friend shout, "Saucepan," he yelled, "dear old saucepan, fancy seeing you." "Glue?" said the saucepan man, suddenly hearing all wrong again. "Glue? No, I've not got glue with me, but I can soon make some for you." "Still the same silly old saucepan man, aren't you?" cried Mr. What's-his-name. "Come down here. I didn't say anything about glue. Come and have a cup of tea with me. The kettle's boiling." "I don't want oiling," said the saucepan man, though he really sounded as if he did. He was so full of clangs and clatters. "I'll come and have tea and a talk with you. Hurrah!" Put his foot on the ladder, but unfortunately he stepped on a kettle that had got round his leg, and down he went. Clatter, bang, crash, smash, clang. Mr. What's-his-name caught at him as he went past, and down he went too, rolling off the ladder, down the branch, past Moonface's door and down the tree. "There they go," said Moonface in delight. "All mixed up with kettles and saucepans. What a joke. They'll give old Dame Wash-a-Lot a fright if they fall into her wash-tub." The children laughed till they cried. The old saucepan man really was so funny, and they couldn't imagine what people in the tree would think as he rolled down with such a clanging and banging. "It's quite safe to go down now," said Joe, peering down the ladder. "They've disappeared. I shouldn't wonder if they're at the bottom of the tree by now. Come on, Moonface." So down the ladder they all went, slid down the topmost branch and opened Moonface's door. Silky was still there, looking scared out of her life. She gave a scream of joy when she saw them. "Why are you looking so frightened?" asked Moonface, giving her a hug. "Oh, goodness, a thunderbolt or something fell out of the sky just now and rolled crashing down the tree," said Silky. "That was only the saucepan man and Mr. What's-his-name," said Joe, laughing, and he told her the whole story. Silky laughed till her sides ached. She ran out of the door and peeped down the tree. "Look," she said, pointing. "Can you see far down there between the branches?" They all looked, and they saw Mr. What's-his-name and the old saucepan man climbing painfully up to Mr. What's-his-name's home, both talking together at the top of their voices. "They've forgotten all about us," said Joe joyfully. "Now, for goodness sake, Moonface, don't go putting acorns into Mr. What's-his-name's mouth again. Let's have something to eat, and then we must go home, down your slippery slip." So they all five sat around Moonface's funny room and ate some pop cakes that Silky fetched and drank acornade, which was made of acorns and was most delicious. Then it was time for the children to go, and they chose cushions, sat at the top of the big tree slide, pushed off and flew down the inside of the tree, sliding round and round and round till they shot out of the trapdoor at the bottom onto the cushion of moss. Then they ran home as fast as they could, for they were late. "I expect the old saucepan man's gone back to his odd little land by now," said Joe, as they turned in at their gate. But he hadn't. He came to see them the very next day, his saucepans clanging so loudly that Mother looked quite alarmed. "Whoever in the world is that?" she said, as the saucepan man came in at the gate.